Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Oh, let's try the Serenity Prayer. This time meaning it, you know. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. As if that were simple. I wish it were as simple as it were short, you know, but I frequently get pretty confused. So I'm glad to be here this afternoon sober, because the odds are against it. And glad to share with you some of my own reflections and things I've gleaned and stolen from others. I'm one of those people who had years and years of training in terms of theology and philosophy in a couple of languages, and none of it made any sense till I got sober. Not to say that it necessarily makes sense now, because sometimes you think if someone's in ministry, you know, if someone is a pastor or a priest or a minister or a rabbi, it's because they are filled with answers. That's like supposing that a psychologist or a psychiatrist is full of mental health. And frequently, many of us find our life's works not because of the answers that are there, but rather because of the questions that grab our interest. And I'll tell you, there are some questions I'm not interested at all. I mean, I have no interest in whole parts of life. And when people talk about them, I glaze over. I just try to be polite, but I glaze over. Other things catch my interest. And I've always found stuff around God and spirit and life and how things fit and how they don't to be really interesting. And I at times have had thousands of answers. And that didn't work at all. And over the years, I've learned to pay attention to a couple of things, and I'm happy to share those with you this afternoon and tomorrow. And the rule of thumb, and it's a good one, and I use it for most things. If anything I say is helpful, please use it. And if it's not helpful, don't worry about it. And I have a very definite point of view. I mean, I don't pretend to be objective, which is always a relief. When I've tried to be objective, I've had to lie a lot more. But when I can just kind of say, this is how I see it, and this is what matches my experience, and it also resonates with you know, this tradition or that tradition, I find it much freer. So I might say some stuff that connects and other stuff that just makes no difference at all to you. That's just fine. That's okay. It is perfectly okay to disagree with the speaker. You need to know that. That doesn't mean the speaker needs to leave AA, or you need to leave AA. You just get to disagree, and both of you, if you're truly crazy, belong at meetings. And we learn tolerance this way over many, many years. Somewhere in the book, Dr. Paul quoted it once when I was listening to him in Martinique. Somewhere in the book, and if I were a Baptist, I'd know exactly where in the book, but I just have one of these vague knowledges, you know. Love and tolerance is our code. Well, I've been to meetings where love and tolerance is the ideal, and we haven't quite reached it, because we're ready to write angry letters to New York asking for people to be expelled from our home group because they're such jerks. Usually what happens instead is that you form a new group. Most new groups, as you know, get formed out of resentment. So if you go into parts of the country where there are thousands of meetings, you know this is an area that is full of resentment. I'm going to talk a little bit this afternoon about step 3. Now, I am not going to exhaust step 3 because I think this whole business of turning it over and understanding God, it's not that it's complicated, but it's elusive. It's elusive. Because when you think you've figured it out, it's a pretty good sign you've missed the point. But before I got on to step 3, I have two things that I've wondered about recently, and I want to wonder about them in the group. And they come from the traditions. And I just want to present these as something for you to think about over the next while. By the way, most of us, I think, are real interested in steps because we're so self-obsessed. What am I doing? What step am I on? How big is my 5th step? How big is your 5th step? We get less interested in the traditions because it concerns the group. And most of us don't care about the group because we're too busy thinking about ourselves. So it takes a little bit of recovery to start thinking about the traditions. And then, if at a meeting you mention the 12 concepts, people fall out of their chairs. They don't know what you're talking about because they're still busy thinking about themselves. So it takes some time to get the layers and the levels of recovery. But in those traditions, the first one, we talk about the common welfare. Our common welfare comes first. I find it interesting that we read that step so easily and just kind of glide over it as if it were obvious, because in my experience and observation, most of us have no idea what the common welfare means. If you're an addict and a junkie and crazy, such as myself, your idea of the common good is I get my way. And if I get my way a lot, we'll all get along just fine. See? Now, later on in the book, there is a description of self-will run riot, which occasionally some of us have been observed doing. Common welfare, common good, is a very important reality if love and tolerance is our code. I was at a meeting once in Northern California. It was Christmas Eve. Everybody was nuts. There were 3 people at the meeting. 4. One was the guy who was leading the meeting, and I didn't like him. His accent was wrong. There was a woman there who, I was visiting relatives. I was crazy. She was visiting relatives. She was crazy. She needed a meeting. And we asked the fellow whose accent I didn't like and who therefore was wrong, asked if there were any topics. And the 4th guy at the meeting, who was a little hostile, wanted to know, this was the topic, why won't they let me bring my knife into the meeting? That was not the time to reflect on common good in the group. But I assure you, for our common good, he should not carry knives into meetings, even though he probably has some kind of deep need. And as we develop how things become safe and real and helpful for us, we develop a notion of community. And at times, the common good means none of us gets our own way. And that this is not bad. Oh, I hate that. So common good, I just think, is an interesting experience for many of us. Another one, and this is, I think, in the second tradition, we talk about group conscience, as if that's something else many of us are familiar with. Conscience? When I got here, I didn't have any idea what conscience was, other than a dictionary definition. I wasn't even sure what the difference was between pain and pleasure, much less right and wrong. And at the very first meeting, I started hearing people reading about group conscience, and I thought I knew what they were talking about. But group conscience takes time and sophistication and a lot of interchange before we know if the group has a conscience, A, and B, what that looks like. So, common good, group conscience. Step 3, which is why you've paid your admission this afternoon to hear. Part of my training, where I mostly focused on theology, took place at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley in the 1970s, 1974 to 1977. And there was a time in my denomination, I'm a member of the Jesuit community in the Roman Catholic Church. If you were going to study to be a priest, what they would do is lock you far away. So you would have no contact with anybody. You would learn a lot of stuff in a language that hadn't been practically used in 15 centuries, and then you would be let loose to try to help people. This was considered perfectly reasonable, and one of the reasons was we've always done it this way. About 1966, 1967, there was a huge change within my own religious community. We moved our School of Theology from the mountaintop in Los Gatos, California, and moved it to the campus of the University of California at Berkeley. Under this theory, if you're going to work with people, why not meet some? And we joined a complex called the Graduate Theological Union. They also have one in Cambridge and in Toronto. And in the Graduate Theological Union, there were 9 different denominations, 12 different schools, and we all studied together. And you could take classes from any of the schools. So I had the great privilege of studying with Episcopal teachers, Lutheran teachers. 2 of my teachers were rabbis. We had people who were Zen practitioners spend time with us. There was a huge interchange, not just among the students and faculty, but also among the women and men who were studying for ministry. And so you hear lots of things. So number 1, what you need to know about me is my training is real ecumenical. I've just been raised with the thought that there are lots of things to learn. And it's real important, love and tolerance is our code, to learn how to listen to more than just groups you're instantly familiar with. And I found that stretches me a lot. And sometimes I find it is a very uncomfortable place to be. One of the texts that we spent some time with was taking a look at people's understanding of God as it developed in India. And the Bhagavad Gita is one of the scriptures that's used and has been used for millennia. And the Bhagavad Gita makes a couple of very interesting distinctions, which I think are good to start off a little bit on the third step, distinction. One of the clarifications it makes in the Bhagavad Gita among people who seek, those who seek. There are 2 kinds of seekers. There are 2 kinds of searchers, according to these Hindu scriptures. One are persons who only want it their way. Now, they're willing to do anything to get their way, but that's their goal. You know, take no prisoners, charge full speed ahead. And I, for a long time, thought that that's what prayer was all about. Get your goals and then manipulate God into getting your way. I thought was perfectly reasonable. But that's one whole group of people. The other group of seekers are people who are trying to get out of the way so that God's energy, God's grace can work. So those are two groups that they talk about. And then a little further on in the Bhagavad Gita, it says there are 4 kinds of people who pray. There are 4 kinds of prayer. Number 1, and this is honest, sincere, legit, real prayer. Number 1, it's the prayer of people who want to get out of suffering. This is the prayer that some of us have prayed, very hungover. Oh God, let me die. That prayer. The prayer of, oh, I'm in trouble. The prayer of get me out of this one and I'll never do it again. This is really bad. I mean, you just realize that you are in deep trouble. And the prayer that comes to your lips is sincere and honest. Help! Because you're in pain. I've done that one. I did that one not long ago. You might have noticed, one of my ankles is twice the size of the other. This is not genetic. About 3 weeks ago, I was running along a beach in Santa Barbara looking very much like a young gazelle. It was in between storms, and waves were just fabulous, and I thought, this will fix me, and I was so charged with energy and life. Gravity was barely holding my feet to the sand. And I was so confident of my omnipotence that I didn't pay attention. And within seconds, I went from young gazelle to old goat. And landed on my ankle wrong, and it just exploded into these lovely black and purple and yellow colors, and very large. And I'm not that much of a traditional male, but I have just enough testosterone to say, oh, I'll run through this. Surely God wouldn't do this to me. You know, let's blame the responsible party. And I found that I was in a huge amount of pain. And, you know, oh God, help me get to the car. Oh God, help me find ice. Oh God, help me elevate the foot. Honest, simple, true prayer. A second and a little bit higher level of prayer, according to the Gita, is, I think in its purest form, it was sung by Janis Joplin, and it's, oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all drive Porsches. I must make amends. We know that song. We prayed that. This is the prayer where you say, I want one of those and 3 of those. I need a lot of this now, quickly, pronto. It is the prayer for material gain. It's the prayer for the right house, the right partner, the right kids. If not this group, we'll get another group later. But this also can be a very sincere, honest prayer. But that's what it's looking for, is gain. The third kind of prayer, which is a little higher, it's those who pray to be relieved of the bondage of self. Now, most of us, when we get in here, starting to go to AA, Al-Anon, NA, OA, SLAA, the groups, you know, all our best friends, we don't think self is a problem. I mean, I want to be my own best friend, which means I get my way now, out of the way, take no prisoners. I mean, we've mentioned this a little earlier today. It takes a while of hanging around the program before we find out, many of us, that we are our own worst enemies. How on earth do you get freed from the bondage of self? If you only think about yourself, it never occurs to you that you're only thinking about yourself. I was attending a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous years ago when I was a young pup. And this was Sunday night on Wilshire Boulevard in L.A. And this remarkable woman got up and said, I remember one thing about my childhood, and that was me. yeah. I mean, this is, let me tell you about me. And bondage of self. You start realizing that you're at meetings, you can't hear anybody else talk because you're thinking about what you're going to say. And then you say it, and then you can't hear anybody talk because you think about what you've been saying. And of course, you usually show up late and leave early because you have so many things to do. And if you say, gee, you seem to be bound up in yourself, what? I don't know what you're talking about. It takes some time to realize that most of us, even after we've put down the bottle or whatever else is killing you, most of us have constructed a prison all about ourselves, and we can only think about one person, and that's me. And that's a hard way to live. So with this third level, we ask of prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self. My sponsor is a hopeless alcoholic. And sober almost 25 years, but that's only through the grace of God. He says that what going to meetings and answering the telephone do for him is it breaks up his ongoing meditation on himself. You know? You answer the phone, you're not thinking about yourself for a few seconds. It's one reason why I resent answering the phone. You go to a meeting, if you can listen to anybody speak, you're not thinking about yourself. But otherwise, an awful lot of us think about ourselves a lot. Gee, I wonder how I'm doing. I wonder if I'm digesting that properly. I wonder what my spiritual temperature is today. Am I getting another cold? Am I getting a disease? Have I put on 2 pounds? Have I taken off 2 pounds? Let me think about myself. Have you thought about me today? Let's talk about me. The fourth level of prayer, according to the Bhagavad Gita, are those who only seek to do God's will, which is step 11, which is tomorrow. Okay? But this third level, this getting rid of the bondage of self so that we can be somehow of practical use, I think is crucial, this third step stuff. So I want to massage it for a while. And I was reading the book, and this is something that one of the chapters we read a lot. I don't know if you're like me, but I do have a tendency to leave the room even when I'm still sitting there. And I'll be at the beginning of a meeting and somebody will read, "Rarely have we seen a person fail," and I go somewhere. I don't know where I go. I think about important things, And then I come back to the room when I hear God could and would if he were sought. Boom, I'm back in the room. Where did I go? I don't know. And one of the problems with always reading the same stuff over and over and over and over again is all of a sudden, instead of becoming familiar, it becomes impossible to hear. So when I try to read familiar things, I really try to be there for it, because otherwise I miss it. Anyway, God could and would if God were sought, boom, period, meeting starts. What I find interesting is the next couple of lines in the text, which says, being convinced, being convinced. I taught English for just too long to let something like that go by. If one of my 15-year-olds turned a sentence like that in, I would say, being convinced of what? But I don't do that anymore because it's the book and I don't criticize it. But Bill writes like a stockbroker who got sober. Being convinced, italics, we were at step 3. Being convinced of what? That we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, and that God could and would if God were sought. I'm always relieved that it doesn't say in our text, God could and would if God were found. Because I think there is something crucial to the process of seeking that enables us to connect with other spiritual and religious traditions that have been around for centuries that have seekers. And then we go on in the text to look upon what does this third step mean, and it talks about self-centeredness, and it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Now, that's something that comes out of Bill's hard-earned experience. And a lot of us are encouraged, and he goes into some paragraphs describing this, a lot of us are encouraged that to have a successful life, you need a lot of self-will. And that's how you win, and that's how you take charge, and that's how you come out on top. Be highly competitive and take no prisoners. And it's a hard way to live. So step 3 is a real change in the energy. We talk like that in California. We talk about changing energy. It's a real change in the energy from I am going to take charge of my life and do it my way to the realization that I'm not in charge, but there's something that is in charge, and I'm going to go along with that. One of the books that was a big influence on Bill after he got sober and began paying attention to a lot of things is a book written by the psychologist William James. It's mentioned in the big book, and it's called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Professor James wrote this at the turn of the century, and Professor James is an American psychologist taught somewhere there in the Boston area, and Professor James is a major contributor to a school of philosophy that is called pragmatism. And I find that real interesting because one of the reasons that I like Alcoholics Anonymous so much and Al-Anon and the other 12-step programs is they're very practical. The key chapter of the book, chapter 5, is not entitled What It Means. It's not entitled, How Does All This Cosmically Fit Together in God's Mind? It's entitled, How It Works. And it's this American notion of let's use what works, and here's what we've done, and if you want it to, do what we've done, and things happen, which I find real refreshing. Consequently, just taking a look at step 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. How do most of us understand God? Not very well. That's how most of us understand God. God is real big, and most of us aren't. And therefore, if you look at religious traditions that had been around for a few 24 hours, such as the Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, the Buddhists, and the Hindus, to name 5, they're all kind of convinced of the fact that God is mysterious. And that one of the reasons God is mysterious is because God is so big and we're not. And there's all kinds of levels that God operates on, and we don't get it. And we're always trying to figure it out and figure it out and figure it out, and we don't. And every so often when we think we have it nailed down, it changes. And this is the experience of women and men since the beginning. Well, how does anybody know anything about God? The way I understand it is most of us learn about God from our own experiences. This is why for so many of us, our recovery from alcoholism is such a vital and key experience. What do I know about God? Well, for years I couldn't stop drinking. I'm currently sober. And in my experience, I didn't get me sober. See? Something happened. Energy moved. again, California. And whereas one day I couldn't stop drinking, the next day I didn't have to drink. Something changed the scenario, and whatever this was, I call God. What do I know about God? Well, somehow healing's been involved. Somehow change has been involved. Do I understand the mind of God? Oh, no. But one day I couldn't stop drinking, and the next day I stopped drinking. Mysterious. Well, what'd you do? I don't know. I don't know what I did differently from day one to day two. But I have the experience of liberation. That matches other people's experience. And as other people talk about their experience, which is largely what we do at meetings, experience, strength, and hope, you start hearing very similar stories told over and over and over again. I couldn't stop. Then suddenly, I didn't have to use. What happened? I don't know. And then, I guess that was sort of step 2 and 3, and I decided to trust whatever it was that led me out of slavery. I'm going to trust. In the Jewish tradition, the key experience of who is God is written about in great detail in the book of Exodus, which is the second book of the Jewish scriptures. The book of Exodus is where Charlton Heston leads all the slaves into freedom, if you have seen the movie instead. A reflection on God and special effects might be interesting to make here, but I'm not going to make it. And if you look at Exodus, here's the story. It has 3 basic parts. Part number 1, there's this whole bunch of people, women and men, who are enslaved, who are miserable, and who cry out in their misery. The text doesn't even say they cry out specifically to a specific God. It's just that they're miserable and they know it. And they say, "Oi, we're miserable," a lot. There's a power greater than themselves that responds to this cry for help. And this is the beginning of a very interesting notion that goes through Judaism, is picked up by Christianity and Islam, that God hears the cry of the poor. That God is especially drawn to people who are very battered. And that God is not always on the side of the rich and the powerful, which the rich and the powerful don't know, but, you know. This notion is real strong. So God responds. Now, God does not respond presto, changeo, quick, everything's different. There's a lot of things that have to happen, and a lot of people have to cooperate. Moses' mom, Pharaoh's daughter, lots of servants, cooks, cleaners, wet nurses, people who can teach this little kid how to walk and talk, and the kid himself. Moses has to cooperate, go along with the program, go along with the program. There's shifts and shags and all kinds of things, but finally, Moses, at the age of 75, is ready to confront Pharaoh. Now, that's a lot of time. I would have preferred something quicker, but they didn't ask for my opinion. Moses confronts Pharaoh, who is the seat of power. And one of the things I happen to like, and you would miss this if you saw the movie, Moses stutters. Moses is the one who speaks for God, and he has this really bad stutter. I think it's hilarious. So he needs his brother Aaron to clarify everything for him. Pharaoh won't cooperate. Pharaoh has his own idea. Weirdness happens. There's plagues, there's locusts, there's chaos. Finally, Pharaoh gets sick of everything and tells them, get out of here, just get out of my sight, and they run for their lives because Pharaoh will not stay open-hearted on this. And they end up in the desert. They end up out of Egypt into the desert, and within a short period of time, they're complaining. We had it better in Egypt. Food was better. We knew who we were. We didn't have to put up with fleas. It was easier in Egypt. Slavery, okay, it had its problems, but you know. And Moses has to work this whole thing out with who are we now? We used to be slaves. We knew who we were. How do we talk about being free people? Moses goes to the mountaintop. God's there. They discuss things, or rather, God says things. Moses writes things down. It wasn't really a discussion. And it was time for this people to turn their will and their lives over to God's care. It was time for step 3. And Moses gets instructions, a lot of instructions, and says, well, listen, you have all this stuff written down. Who are you? Who do I tell people you are? Because they're going to want some information about you, you know. And the voice responds, I am the one who led you out of Egypt, that place of slavery. Period. Oh, well, nice to meet you. And Moses goes down the mountainside and explains that to people. The power that found us as slaves and turned us into a free people wants us to bond, and can we do this? And there's a big discussion, and they finally decide to go along with it. But the story of Exodus has 3 parts. One is an experience of powerlessness and unmanageability. The second is a long process where something happens to create change and freedom. And part 3 is, do you trust the source of your freedom? That should sound familiar. Because I think, and again, in talking of the spiritual journey, to my understanding, is not about finding the right answers so I can judge others accurately. That's not the spiritual journey. There's a program for that. 12 steps. Lois had a lot to do with it. The spiritual journey is about the experience of liberation and freedom. That's what's central to it. So how do we understand God? Most of us have some experience of being so tied up we could not get out, and then somehow we were free. And to trust this experience. And then sobriety is about learning how to live the life of a free and responsible woman or man, namely in community and tied to service. I mean, I think that's really how it goes. But back to step 3 again. Making a decision. What's the problem here? Well, most of us don't trust God. We really don't. We'll trust God maybe with our alcoholism, but we won't trust God with our checkbook or our sex lives or our relationships or our kids. We're kind of convinced that if we take God at all seriously, the fun's over. Say, I'll never have another really fun day. Because we're convinced that God is the bad news, not the good news. And part of this is because many of us have really awful ideas about God. And you get them. I mean, you just get them walking down the street. I think God is problematic. I think it is hard to understand this frequently. Some that I find real interesting and have been part of my life. Part of my life is I believed that God was disinterested and far away. So no matter what I did, God was busy doing something else God would rather be doing. So if I turned my will and my life over, there was really no one there to take it. I mean, there was someone there to take it, but he was out. Now that's a hard one to deal with, and I was sober for a couple of years before I realized that was my pattern with God. I was afraid that if I turned it over, nothing would happen because God did not find me interesting enough to care. Others of us have different experiences. We don't have a distant, faraway God. We have a God who is enraged and vengeful and who keeps score. So you're convinced. I was talking to a woman a while ago, some years ago. She was raised in an Orthodox Jewish background, and her family had rules and regulations and very clear opinions. And as she became sober and abstinent, she had a little alcohol and food problem, and she left the religion of her childhood because she found it very difficult for her for a lot of reasons. And in her sobriety, she came to terms with the fact that she was lesbian and began to, hate yourself less, live a life, let's cope. And she heard you have to trust God. She was told, growing up, that God hated lesbians. So I want you to turn your will and your life over to the care of someone who hates you. She resisted the notion. And I think that's a sign of mental health. When you find out that God doesn't hate God's children, even if unconventional, it's a very disturbing thought for some of us who had very neat universes with the in crowd and the out crowd, and we, of course, were always in the in crowd, unless we were the out crowd. God is very big. I mean, this is one of the great truths of Muhammad and the Buddha and Moses and Jesus. God is very big. And you should not create God in your own image and likeness. This will make you sick. And you know you've created God in your own image and likeness if your God hates all the same people you do. God is bigger than our prejudices, and this is so disturbing to so many of us who are church-related, we can't even think about it, because we have our rules and regulations. God's really big and a lot more tolerant than most of us, which is why God is God and we're not. See? God is big. But some of us, anyway, this particular woman, her dad was just full of judgment and rage all the time, and she was convinced that's how God would respond to her. For many, many, many of us, our first experience of a higher power is good old mom and dad. And it takes a while to develop a relationship with a higher power that's just not mom and dad. If one of your parents or both of your parents were real screaming, raging lunatics, you will have more difficulty in dealing with God as a grown-up than people whose parents were not screaming lunatics, But we all have some difficulty. Sometimes when I hear some preachers talk, when they get off on hellfire and brimstone and that long list of people who are going to roast in hell, I wonder which parent drank. Because they heard that somewhere. And in that particular tone of voice, and it's just this untreated rage. The spiritual rule is this: fearful, angry, rule-obsessed people have gods just like that. Fearful, angry, and rule-obsessed. I can remember as a little kid around the age of 10 or 12 being convinced. Being raised Catholic, I assure you, we had a couple of rules and regulations. Being absolutely convinced that if I ate a hot dog on a Friday, I would be struck by lightning. Now, Hitler could get away with a lot of stuff, but not me, Crazy. Just crazy. And you kind of have to go back on a lot of these things as a grown-up and sort stuff out. What's real, what's not real. God is big. So the question, and this is fundamental to step 3, and why some of us have a few difficulties, is this: can God be trusted to have my best interests at heart? Because if you don't trust, it's a little difficult to do it. There are some problems here, and again, a reference back to self-will run riot. It has been my experience that if I turn my will and my life over to God's care, I don't get my way. I wish I knew a way of turning it over just so that I do get my own way. Jesus wanders around, does stuff. His apostles come up and say, teach us how to pray. And Jesus teaches the Lord's Prayer, which is a good basic outline of how to pray. And one of the key sentences in there, and this is sort of a third step thing, one of the key sentences is, Father in heaven, thy will be done. See, I want my will be done. Please, God, just this once, my way now. That's how I begin every day. And it takes me about 3 cups of coffee and maybe a meeting and talking to my sponsor, who's really naggy, to say probably God's will being done will be better in the long run for all of us. And I need to realize that if my will got done, civilization as we know it would be threatened. I need to know this. Thy will be done. Thy will be done. And then the prayer says, because I am inclined a little bit to worry, give us this day our daily bread. I'm in a part of the country where we feel quite free to change prayers at the drop of a hat. And so we pray, Our Father who art in heaven, our Mother who art in heaven, our energy source which art in heaven, our power which art in heaven. I mean, we do that at the drop of it. That really bothers some people. And then we pray, give us this day our daily fill in the blank. Our daily energy, our daily strength, our daily this, our daily that, all of which is fine. The original text talks about giving us this day our daily bread. And I like the notion of bread because I think it's a real rich notion. Bread means nourishment. Bread means strength. Bread means support. Bread also means if you break bread with people, you have companions, compane. You have bread with people. You develop a community of bread breakers. It's a very powerful thing. So I like praying. I like the notion of praying for bread. But my problem with the prayer is I'm not interested in daily bread. I want enough bread to get me through the next 40 years. See? But the prayer is, third step, give me enough. Enough? What does enough mean? Give me enough for today. As an alcoholic, I just find that inadequate and disappointing. It's like the drunk who goes to the bar, and they say, what are the rules here? And they say, well, for $10, it's all you can drink, and he gives them $20. I'll take twice of that, please. That's my basic approach. One of my friends is a hopeless alcoholic up in Seattle. His name's Jim H., and Jim talks about this foreign concept, and the concept is enough. God, give me enough. I'd want enough plus 10%. I want to hedge the bet somehow so I have more than I need, and even then I need more. See? There's problems here. So the notion of thy will being done, and then the notion of just for today, daily, 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 give me enough, makes me feel very marginal. And makes me feel like I'm kind of on the edge. And I think it's important to say that sometimes is the experience of faith. Faith and hope. That you believe, but that doesn't mean you feel real secure. You believe that there's going to be enough. But I'd like a lot more. And sometimes faith is a journey. I know when I was growing up, when we talked about the faith, we were talking about an outline of propositions. Do you believe this? This is the faith. I mean, yes, we believe all of that. Well, that's one meaning of the word faith, this coming to believe, this turning it over. But faith is also an experience, and the experience is sometimes a difficult one. What are some common experiences of faith? Can God be trusted? Sometimes with God, you can feel very secure. Bill Wilson writes about this in the book. Walking hand in hand with the Creator of the universe. That's a great day. Most of the time, I do not have this experience. And that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with my program. Every so often, some people have what are referred to in the literature as mystical moments. And there are some people who are great mystics, and evidently they have some incredible sense of the presence of God. I am not one of these people, in case rumors start. Just so you know this, I am not one of these people. I find that God baffles me regularly, and most of the time I do not feel that slow buzz of, oh, God is here. I just don't feel it. I just know that I'm not drunk at the moment, and it's okay. And here we are in Cancun, and my right ankle hurts. And so we do one step in front of the other. I know some folks who find that to be not enough. They want constant high with the third step, especially if they've dropped a lot of acid. Because you get this notion that if you turn it over into God's care, you should be living in a world of constant special effects. And that's not the experience that most of us have, and it's not the experience of most of the people I trust. For most of us, we lead pretty ordinary lives. Time to sleep, time to eat, time to go to a meeting, time to pay bills, time to stand in line at Safeway. Pretty ordinary lives. And I think that's a good thing. One of the great insights of the Buddha, and I think if you're agitated and crazed and need Valium real bad, you might take a look at some Zen meditation and breathing. It really helps, takes the edge right off, and it's a lot cheaper. Won't have to change your sobriety date either. But the Buddha talked about, what happens when you trust God? What happens when you have a spiritual experience? I mean, first of all, how do you get to that point? And the Buddha said, chop wood and carry water. Lead your ordinary life. Pay your bills, say hello to your kids, put up with whoever it is you're related to currently. Pray for the good of people who drive you crazy. Be here. Chop wood. Carry water. Pretty mundane stuff. They said, okay, we got that. Now tell us, what happens once you've had a spiritual experience? What do you get to do then? What do you get to do then? And the Buddha said, you get to chop wood and carry water. Now I can't tell you how offensive I find that. Because I want to stand in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles and say, I know I didn't make an appointment, but can I go first? I'm a sober person, and I have a lot to do today, and I'm special. See? As a sober person, I get to stand in line. As a sober person, I get to pay my bills. As a sober person, I get to have a pretty mundane life. What I get to have as a free human being is a life. Which is what step 3 is all about, having a life. Turning our will and our life over to God's care does not mean we will never have bad days. I have been to meetings where someone, had bad days. IRS problems, family problems, health problems. And some people stood up and said, well, if you worked a better program, you wouldn't have these problems. This, to use a technical theological phrase, is bullshit. One of the ways you can spot real living human beings is they have real living problems. And most of us do. Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, first sentence, life is difficult. It really is. And sober doesn't mean, oh, now it's nothing but clear sailing from here. No, it's still difficult. What I used to use to not deal with the difficulty was booze and dope. What I get to use, clean and sober, is tools and program and fellowship. But it doesn't mean it becomes easy. Some things are just awful. One of the women in the East Bay who is drawing sober breath as we speak, against all odds, I might add, says, when you get sober, you feel better. You feel everything better. Absolutely true. And if we look at some of our situations, they're overwhelming. Well, how do we get through this? Daily bread, thy will be done. Daily bread, thy will be done. My experience of the third step, it is a statement of policy. I don't just do it once and then say, well, I've done that now. Smooth sailing from here on in. I find that I'm one of those people who turn it over, take it back, turn it over, take it back, turn it over, take it back, turn it over, take it back. Well, what should I do about that? Well, when I notice I've taken it back, I try to remember to turn it over. And there's this is ongoing. I mean, again, well, everything is clear. Finally, life is smooth sailing. Well, you just wait. And then stuff happens, and it's time to turn it over again. And I find every so often I am literally at step one, and everything is new, and it is as if I know nothing. C.S. Lewis, member of the Church of England, wrote a lot of stuff, much of which I like very, very much, said this about step three, although he didn't know he was writing about step three. He said, relying on God has to begin all over again every day as if nothing had yet been done. I hate that. Because, see, I want to say, listen, I was so close to God last month, I think I should have some credit for this month. And that's not the way it worked. I'm very happy that you were real close to God last month, but you ended up being so close to God that you became God and began judging one or two of the newcomers at meetings and a couple of the old-timers. So we get to start all over again, you know. And sometimes with great desperation, step one, what do I need to do?
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think.
My sponsor, who needs the program, when I call him with deep insight into what it really all means, he will respond like this, because I think a lot of step three is footwork. He says, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do? He says, go to meetings, shake hands, take your turn. Yeah, but what does it mean? I mean, I want to know a lot. Go to meetings. Whose hand should I shake? Oh, half a dozen people, anyone there, newcomers, old-timers. Say hello, shake hands, make contact. What turn should I take? Oh, sometimes it's time to speak. Sometimes it's your turn to take out the garbage. Take your turn, you know. You're part of the group. Participate. Don't just sit back and judge others, which is my gift. Participate. I really do think that an awful lot of the energy, there's that word again, around step three is learning how to get out of our own way. Relieve me from the bondage of self. Getting out of our own way so that God can make use of us. And the amazing thing is God makes use of us. Some of us who are most unlikely. become very useful people. And not in ways that we understand. See, I want to be useful in a special way. Instead, I find that I'm frequently useful as a warning to others. And I'll share something deeply insightful at a meeting, and 6 people leave the meeting and call their sponsors and want to work the program real hard so they don't end up like me. And God has skills. God isn't just big, God has skills. And I need to know that I can rely on that even if I don't know what those skills are. Faith experiences. Some of us have the experience that faith is like a bright, shining light. Suddenly things are clear. I can see clearly now, the pain is gone. I used to listen to that when I was drinking a little socially, looking forward to the pain being gone. And we do, all of a sudden, I have a disease? Is that it? And there's a way out, and there's steps, and there's direction, and if you want what we have, and oh, thank God, what a good thing. The experience is light. That's a very important kind of faith. But there are other kinds of faith. My friend Michael, who died sober 5 or 6 years ago, Michael was sober about 10 years, and he was working in the field, and he was doing a lot of stuff in San Francisco with the Haight-Ashbury drug program, and Michael was a good, basic, regular AA kind of guy who did not put up with fools easily. And one day he was working at the Haight-Ashbury drug clinic, and they said, we want all of you to be tested for HIV because we ask our clients to get tested, and we shouldn't ask them to do things we don't do. So Michael, who had a chaotic life up until he came into Alcoholics Anonymous, got tested, and not only came back positive, and that rattled him a little bit, didn't think he was, and then you do this T cell count, and 5 to 1,500 T cells are what your basic 18-year-old meat-eating football player has, real strong, real healthy. And if you drop below 300, it's not a good sign, and 200 is a much worse sign. And he got tested for how many T cells? He had 14. And he called me that night, and I hadn't seen him in a bit. And he said, Tom, I thought I knew what living a day at a time meant. And I thought I knew what daily bread meant. But all of a sudden, I am in a very dark place, and I don't know what to do. And for some of us, this becomes a profound experience of faith. Not losing your faith, but needing a faith. Because in this very dark room, without borders and without any kind of sense of direction, he found that he had to put one foot in front of the other, and he had to walk through this. And there are times when some of us find ourselves in very dark rooms. And it's interesting to me that we can then reflect on, how much faith do I need to take action? And I need 100% faith, then I can take action. Well, I find that sometimes I just need 3% faith. And you do the next thing, knowing that you're doomed, except maybe there's a 3% chance you aren't doomed. And you do the next thing. And you do the next thing. And just to briefly say that there are people in the program, who are good folks. I just disagree with them on this. They think you cannot have fear and faith at the same moment. I have fear and faith all the time. What do you do? I don't drink, I don't use, I go to meetings. And I talk about being afraid, and I talk about having faith. Clear example of that, I sponsor one of the whiniest people in North America. And this is someone who didn't really discuss a lot of crucial issues with the IRS for about 10 years. He was busy and got distracted. So sober, and he thought, he would wake up every night in cold sweats knowing that the IRS was getting closer and closer, which I think is an accurate prediction. And we talked about things, we being several of us and several people who had IRS problems, and a couple of people who had these experiences said, well, why don't you give them a call and say, listen, I'd like to begin negotiations. And full of fear, he made the phone call. And full of fear, he kept the appointment. And full of fear, he worked out a deal with the IRS. You know? Sometimes we think, well, as long as I have a flicker of fear, I don't have enough faith and I'm not going to move. And that's how a lot of times it gets worse. Sometimes we don't need a lot of faith, just a little tiny bit. One of the rabbis teaching about this kind of stuff, and I'm almost done, one of the rabbis says, what is faith like? And he says, faith is like mustard seed and yeast. Step 3. It's like mustard seed and yeast. Little tiny guys that you don't even pay attention to or notice, but if you put them in the right soil and they're taken care of a little bit, they'll grow until they're big enough to be noticed and take action with. And for some of us, when we notice we have no faith or very, very little, we can ask in prayer and meditation to get some mustard seed and yeast thrown into us. And I find my faith and my hope increases if I can hear women and men who are recovering alcoholics and addicts and the people who've gotten in our way talk about this experience of faith. And if someone's in a dark room, it is real important to know that doesn't mean they're alone. And they can walk through it. And sometimes you'll find people on the program 5, 10, 25, 30 years, and all of a sudden they don't know who they are, they don't know where they're going, nothing makes sense anymore, they're back at step 1 and it's a dark room. It's not that they've done something wrong. It's just one of the other very real experiences. And along with fear and faith, I think doubt and faith go together a lot. I believe some things very strongly most of the time. And every so often, I'm not sure of anything. Well, what do you do, Tom? Well, I go to a meeting, and I find it very important to hear people who are sure of things talk about it. One of the things I heard in Oakland when I first got sober was the reason Alcoholics Anonymous works is because we're not all crazy on the same day. But we all get to be crazy, you know? And there are times when it's very fragile to be here. And again, I need to be brought back to notions of daily bread, enough, just for today, and thy will be done. Figuring that this works out, therefore. Last point. I think that if you listen to people a lot, you're going to hear a lot of opinions and points of view, some of them very, very old, about what God's will is and how it fits together and how do you know what God's will is and the third step and turning it over and do you trust God. Those are profoundly human concerns. And if those are your concerns, don't be ashamed of that. That's very real. And most of us pretty much are regular needers of hearing people talk about faith and hope and that journey. Biblically, one of the images that comes up, because I don't think God is easy to deal with, is in the Jewish scriptures, Jacob wrestles with an angel all night long. And through the text, it's kind of a clearer understanding that Jacob is really wrestling with God. And for some of us, that's what faith is like. We wrestle with it. You know? For some, it's like, arm wrestling. And that's our experience of prayer. Just my way, God's way, my way, God's way. And you kind of just hope you'll wear out. But if I get the slightest bit of energy, I'm back wrestling again. No wonder I get worn out. So wrestling with God is an ancient way of making conscious contact. Another metaphor that gets used, and this is more of Ingmar Bergman, for those of you who are of Swedish background. You're on the shores of one of these murky little gray Swedish lakes, and you're playing chess, you and God. Your move, God's move. Your move, God's move, you know. And is being checkmated good news or bad news is the question, and we're not sure. We hope it's good news. Moses and the bush, you know, the burning bush. Who are you? Moses wants to know. And it's kind of interesting that the bush is in flames. I mean, you can't grab onto flame, you know, and control it. It's just alive. It's energy. And Moses wants to know, what's your name, and tell me all about you so I can run the show here. And the bush responds, do what you're told, shut up, go to work. But I want to be in charge, bush. Nope. Just follow directions. That was the basic message of the burning bush. Follow directions. It's like my sponsor on occasion. If you want to read some stuff that I think is very, very powerful about how God works, the best book I've read in a long time is Rabbi Harold Kushner's book entitled When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It is profound. He reflects on these kinds of things and does not come up with easy answers, which is one of the reasons I respect him so. Rabbi Harold Kushner. And we're invited, as women and men clean and sober one day at a time, we are invited to participate with God as God works in the world. Out of my own Jesuit tradition, Jesuits get going in the mid-1500s, and our founder had some very clear experiences of God. His hospital room did not fill up with light, but there were some experiences like that. And as he was forming a relationship with his higher power, the higher power verbally told him that he was invited, he, Ignatius Loyola, was invited to labor with the God who labors. Now, I like that for several reasons. One of which is we're not just sitting back waiting for things to end. We're invited to go to work. We're invited to labor. We're invited to be of service. We're invited to carry the message with the God who is still at work, is still laboring, is still carrying the message. The energy of God is dynamic stuff. And in the third step, just getting out of the way enough to let God work in our lives connects us with the profound stuff of the universe. And even those of us who are self-obsessed drunks and junkies who don't know anything about conscience or common welfare can be used for the common good and the healing of an awful lot of women and men that no one else seems to be able to touch. And I think that is very good news. God has no hands but ours. And it is sometimes wonderful and sometimes a drag to be God's hands. But nevertheless, that's who we are. And to celebrate that and believe in that and allow ourselves to be used instead of sitting back judging, figuring it out, and running the show is an awful lot of step 3. Step 3, show up. Pay attention. Tell the truth. Let go of the results. If we can show up, pay attention, tell the truth, and let go of the results, God will be able to do for us and many others what we could not possibly do for ourselves. And how do we know that God can be trusted? Because once we were slaves, and today we're free. And keep telling each other the story so it lives. That's all I know.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.